Good evening.
Hi.
Happy Friday. Congrats on making it to the end of the work week.
Thank you. Same to you. What topics are you discussing?
Well, lately, mostly with Ukrainians. Well, one of the questions I'm not sure. I don't remember if I talked.
I asked a question. Hold on. Let's pick a topic first. Then we'll figure out the questions.
The situation in Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine?
I don't discuss the situation in Ukraine. Why do you care about Ukraine? You're a Russian citizen, right?
I do care. I do have a reason to care.
Wait, you're a Russian citizen, right?
And what of it? Yes, of course.
Why do you care about Ukraine? Why are you so concerned about Ukraine?
I'm concerned about the UK, the US, and France too.
Let's talk about the UK then. What book have you read about the history of the UK?
I haven't read the history of the UK, but I'm interested in that country.
You're concerned about the UK?
Why not?
Well then, explain why you are. I'm not against it. Is there any explanation?
I like Anglo-Saxon culture.
And why are you concerned about Ukraine? Do you like Ukrainian culture?
Well, because I'm Russian. And Ukrainians are Slavs, a brotherly people.
Who told you that we're brotherly peoples?
I know that
How do you know?
from history.
Wait, is there really such a classification, brotherly peoples? There are language classifications. There are Slavic languages. There are Romance Germanic languages. Well, a philological classification. Who came up with the classification of peoples as brotherly or not brotherly? How do you determine that?
From history.
From history. So, if we once lived in the same country, does that make us brotherly peoples, or is it something else?
We have a shared past.
A shared past. If Austrians and Hungarians lived in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, do you think Austrians and Hungarians are brotherly peoples?
No, not brotherly, but they have roots.
So why are we brotherly peoples? What roots do they have? They have different roots. Austrians.
Because we are Slavs, Ivan Tsarevich.
Austrians are Germans, and Hungarians are Finno-Ugric. They came from Northern Europe.
Yes, absolutely right.
Are all Slavs brotherly peoples? Are Bulgarians, Czechs, Poles, Slovaks brotherly peoples?
Ukrainians are closer then.
More brotherly.
Then Bulgarians. Then Bulgarians. Although Bulgarians are also much closer.
So I just can't figure out what this classification of brotherly peoples is. What is the reason or basis for this classification?
Slavs, Christians, Orthodox.
Slavs, so Serbs and Croats are Slavs. True, some are Orthodox, others are Catholic. But that didn't stop these peoples from fighting each other in the early 90s.
Unfortunately, yes.
Why do you think these brotherly peoples fought each other? You don't know?
Well, they don't consider themselves brotherly peoples. By the way, that's a good example. I don't consider Russians a brotherly people. Serbs and Croats, Russians, Ukrainians. Yes, that's a good example.
I don't consider Russians a brotherly people because such a classification doesn't exist in nature.
Faith divided them.
So what? So if they have different faiths, that means they're not brotherly peoples? Are you aware that among Ukrainians,
That's often a stumbling block.
do you know that there are a lot of Greek Catholics among Ukrainians? They're not Orthodox. Protestants aren't Orthodox either. So for you, are those Ukrainian Greek Catholics also brothers, or does faith divide them too?
How many are there?
There are over 3.5 million Greek Catholics in Ukraine,
In percentage terms, that's
about 10%.
how many Protestants are there?
A little less. So, are Ukrainians who are Greek Catholics and Protestants also brotherly peoples to you, or do they fall out of that category?
That's a good question.
You don't have an answer to that question, so I don't understand where this category comes from. As a historian, I understand who came up with the category of brotherly peoples. What I don't understand is why Russian citizens are still using this category.
I'll explain to you why. Maybe I'm mistaken, although I don't think so. But I consider Ukrainians a brotherly people, even if Ukrainians themselves don't think so.
Why? Because we have the same faith? We have different faiths. We have different faiths. For example, I'm an atheist, and I think most people in Ukraine are atheists too. So what does brotherhood of peoples based on a single faith have to do with it?
So you mean, since you're an atheist and you don't consider
Since I'm an atheist,
Russians and the majority?
yes. As a historian, I can simply explain to you that the concept of brotherly nations was invented during Soviet times. Before that, there was no such thing as brotherly nations. It was exactly during the Soviet era, when we ended up in the same Stalinist concentration camp, that this category was invented to keep Ukrainians in check. Like, look, you're our brothers. You should live peacefully with us. Everything is fine with us. Work tirelessly for Comrade Stalin, get your bread ration, and then you'll be brothers. But if you bark and rebel against Comrade Stalin, we'll deport or shoot you. I don't use Soviet cliches. The Soviet Union has been gone for over 30 years. I've explained the situation to you. Did you have a question?
And in the Russian Empire?
In the Russian Empire, there was no such thing as brotherly peoples. In the Russian Empire, since the late 19th century, there was a theory that there was a single Russian people, Orthodox, which was divided into Great Russians, and Lenin himself wrote in a questionnaire that he was a Great Russian, Little Russians, who are modern Ukrainians, and White Russians. That was the official view in the Russian Empire. The February and October revolutions destroyed all of that. But the Bolsheviks created the same empire again, only this time not headed by an emperor, but by a communist. And in order to keep the other peoples in line, they came up with the fairy tale of brotherly peoples.
Wait, from this point.
Are Kazakhs brotherly peoples to you?
Let's go into more detail from here. So, it turns out the Bolsheviks invented Ukrainians.
No, they came up with the theory of brotherly peoples.
But there was the concept of Great Russians, Little Russians, Belarusians.
That was the official concept of the authorities. But at the academic level, it had long been clear to both philologists and historians that Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians speak East Slavic languages. These are East Slavic languages. Yet each of these peoples has its own history, its own mentality, its own culture. There is the official ideology, and then there is the scientific explanation. The official ideology was as I described, but even back then, the scientific explanation had emerged that these are three East Slavic peoples, each with their own culture, and so on. We were driven into Stalin's concentration camp. I already told you about this. We had our own state, the Ukrainian People's Republic, which existed for 3 years.
Yes, I'm aware.
Yes, the Bolsheviks seized that state and invented Soviet Ukraine. Yes, that's right. It was the Bolsheviks who came up with Soviet Ukraine and called it that to keep us in check, calling us a brotherly people to the Russians. And in the Soviet Union, not only Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians were considered brotherly peoples, but all 15 republics were considered brotherly. Kazakhs were brothers, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and so on. Now, for some reason, the myth remains that only Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians are brotherly peoples. But what about Kazakhs, Lithuanians, Latvians? Aren't they brotherly too?
Latvians and Lithuanians, of course, were never really considered brotherly by anyone.
You're mistaken about the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they were called brotherly peoples and brotherly republics. It was necessary.
Brotherly republics, yes, but not brotherly peoples.
No, just open any Soviet children's books, read them. It was mentioned all the time.
If I lived there, then I remember.
Exactly. And brotherly peoples, the Latvian people, there were always posters with different costumes,
Brotherly republics, yes.
and all the peoples were considered brotherly. You're mistaken. But for some reason, you only remember Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians.
Of course, I could be wrong.
All right, yes. We're just going in circles here. You're using the Soviet approach, but I haven't used that approach for 30 years. There's no Soviet Union anymore.
Question, personally, how do you view, well, more precisely, who do you consider the actual residents of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk republics who actively supported Russia in 2014 and continue to support it even now?
It's very simple. In any country, they're called separatists and collaborators. For example, if in Russia, say, the residents of Voronezh or Kursk regions wanted to join Ukraine, you would view them the same way as separatists and collaborators. That's just international practice. There's no need to make anything up here, no need to invent any brotherly nations. It's all been defined a long time ago.
I understand. I asked for your opinion because you're not the first person.
It's not an opinion, it's a legal definition of people
I understand.
who advocate for the separation of part of a state from the state. That's called a separatist. And if this person, that's it. A person who advocates for the separation of part of a state from the state is called a separatist. He can consider himself whoever he wants, even Buddha, but from the standpoint of the law, he's a separatist. And if he also calls another country and the armed forces of another country onto his territory and joins the governmental or military structures of a foreign state, he is called a collaborator. It's not really an opinion, it's a legal definition.
I understand you. Your opinion matches the legal definition.
Would you have the same opinion if it were citizens of Kursk, Voronezh, or would you label them differently? How? How would you label them?
Listen, I'm not asking how, I asked you. I've asked many people, you gave your opinion. Yes, I would call them separatists.
And collaborators. So, really, there's nothing to invent here.
Question, right now there's a conflict between Russians and Ukrainians. What do you personally think?
The conflict is between Russia and Ukraine, not between Russians and Ukrainians.
All right, fair enough.
Because in your country, it's not just Russians who live there. You have over 140 ethnic groups living there. There are Dagestanis, Buryats, these are Russians, they're Russian citizens, but not ethnically Russian.
But many Ukrainians hate them. Right now, it's like the hatred of Ukrainians.
Many Ukrainians, you asked me, and I answered you. I'm not going to speak for other Ukrainians. That's their personal opinion.
So, let me rephrase the question a bit, I'll ask differently. Some Ukrainians, okay, what's your opinion about a certain group of Ukrainians? They hate Russians and believe that reconciliation between Ukrainians and Russians is never possible. What's your opinion?
That's their right. I wouldn't say that I hate Russians. I really like a phrase by the late Jakar Didiyev. He said that there is no hatred towards Russians, only contempt, like for dead cattle. That's pretty much my attitude, not towards Russians, but towards Russians as citizens of Russia, because they are a people who attack my country and my people and are killing us. That's why there was hatred back in 2014, in the year 2014. That hatred faded away long ago, over these 9 years. But the contempt, like for dead cattle, like for slaves, for people who don't understand what's happening in the world, that remains. That's the kind of contempt I feel. Can I ask you a question? Because you're just.
Yes, go ahead, ask.
In your personal opinion, when did the conflict between the Russian Federation, the military conflict, and Ukraine begin? In 2014 or in 2022?
In 2014,
In your opinion, what is the reason for this conflict? Or maybe there are 1, 2, or 3 reasons.
the conflict of 2014,
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started in 2014.
I've thought about this for a long time, but I still haven't been able to fully understand it or come to any personal conclusions.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Uh, are you recording me?
Of course.
All right.
I'm a blogger. I talk to Russians about history. I very rarely talk about politics. When there's nothing else left to talk about, then you have to talk about politics.
Question: as of today, gas is still being supplied from Russia to Europe through Ukrainian territory. To this day.
Yes.
And Ukraine receives money from Russia for gas transit, as far as I know.
Yes, it does.
How do you even explain all of this?
It's very simple. It's still a hybrid war. To this day, even though it's large scale, it's still hybrid. That is, some trade and economic relations still remain. We only get paid for the transit. We don't buy gas from you. If you know, we buy your gas in reverse, which is then called Slovak gas. We buy this gas from Slovakia, and you, through us, have relations with Europe. We're basically not involved here. If you stop paying us for gas transit, well, that's your problem. You pay, we take the money. You have relations with Europe through this pipeline, not with us.
But really, that's nonsense, when you think about it. You have to admit, in principle. Well, if you look at it, such relations.
If you take the stereotype of the Great Patriotic War, yeah, it does seem like nonsense. But that was 70 years ago. Wars are fought differently now. That's a fact. We would prefer to fight it like the Great Patriotic War, to have absolutely no dealings with you at all. But it's like you have relations not with us, but with Europe. You supply gas there, they pay you for that gas, and we basically get paid for the transit. Well, if you stop supplying gas to Europe, you won't be paying for the transit. So, it all depends on you. And we can't shut down this pipeline because, well, we have obligations to Europe. But you can just shut off the valve on your end, and this nonsense will stop existing.
It's a nice, convenient position for everyone, of course.
So what are we supposed to do? Blow up the pipeline ourselves, with our own hands, and break off relations with European countries, is that it?
I'm not calling for the pipeline to be blown up. Otherwise, after your recording, it'll look like I'm a saboteur and a terrorist. But as it stands, Russia is selling.
Selling gas to Europe, yes.
Selling gas to Europe. And with that money, it turns out, they're making weapons that end up in Ukraine.
The amount of gas has already decreased several times over, if you've been watching. Mainly now.
Only the price has gone up.
No, the price has dropped. Haven't you been following gas prices?
Yeah, I checked recently.
So why are you saying it's gone up if it's actually dropped?
Well, so,
That's a question for you. If you don't want it, just shut off the valve. That's it. It's all up to you. Not up to us. It's not our responsibility here.
it turns out, it turns out that Russia sells gas to Europe through Ukraine, right? Through Ukraine, and gets money for it. With that money, it makes weapons that are then used in Ukraine. And Ukraine, from the money it gets from Russia, buys weapons.
Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. A fact is a fact. It's a strange fact. I completely agree with you. Absolutely. But that's the reality. Well, we can't refuse, because if we do, you'll call us an unreliable partner in that sense. That's for you to decide. If you think gas shouldn't be supplied to Europe, just shut off the valve and that's it. By the way, just the other day I was talking to one of the Russians from Surgut, from those gas-producing regions. He said that gas production has dropped dramatically, that basically, well, we're only extracting gas so we don't have to shut down the gas wells. And we're practically not supplying any gas anymore. Well, Russia. At least, that's what he told me. I'm just passing on what I heard. I'm not really an expert.
I'm not ready to answer that question, how much it's actually dropped.
Just like back in the day when the Turks seized the northern part of the island. Which one was it? Cyprus, right? In the 70s. And there too, there was The Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was established. That's it. And yet, even though they've basically been in a state of undeclared war there for 30 or however many years, maybe even 50 by now, still, they have some kind of relationship there. That's just how it is. The world is complicated.
Maybe I'm just thinking in stereotypes. Maybe.
Well, yes, you think in black and white. It can be gray sometimes.
How do you personally feel about Belarusians?
I don't have any attitude towards Belarusians. How should I treat them?
No, you are Ukrainian.
To the Belarusian people, to the leadership.
To the Belarusian people. No, well, to the leadership. Well, to the Belarusian people. First question.
No way. The Belarusian people are just as, excuse me, passive as the Russian and Russian people. That is, the Belarusian people allow their territory to be used to shell Ukrainian territory. They just allow it. Today, once again, another bomber took off from the Machalishi airfield in Belarus. We had another air raid alert because of that. Russian soldiers are receiving medical treatment in Belarus. The Russians retreated to Belarus from the Kiev region, from Chernihiv, even back then, in March 2022. The Belarusians quietly sit and keep silent. Well, maybe they feel some contempt. A people who don't want to fight for their freedom give their territory for aggression against a neighboring nation. Well, that's just the kind of people they are, I guess.
Yeah.
Although, personally, if I were to meet some Belarusian, what would my attitude toward him be? A Belarusian is just a Belarusian.
Recently, just like you, very recently, I actually saw, and before I continue, let me ask you this. Are you at all familiar with the name Dmytro Gordon?
Yes, I am.
Olesya Batsman.
Well, that's his wife, as far as I know.
All right, yes. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I watched, maybe 4, there was an interview. Batsman and Schuster. Are you familiar with Schuster as well?
Yes, I know him. All three.
Yeah.
Manipulators. I'll tell you that right away. For me, that's not journalism, first of all. When Schuster was young and still working at European radio stations, I used to listen to him as a kid. Yes, I found it very interesting. After he appeared on Ukrainian television, it was just non-stop pro-government manipulation. That's why I have no respect for these people. What do you want to ask me about them?
MMM. About their conversation. So Batsman is talking to Schuster.
I didn't hear that conversation.
I'll tell you.
Let me not discuss a conversation I haven't heard.
But I'll tell you the idea, and you can tell me what you think about it.
What's the point of that?
What was said there?
Maybe it was wrong. Maybe you misunderstood the idea. Maybe I'll misunderstand it. You see, that's what they call counting your chickens before they hatch.
Well, the thing is, I'll say it anyway, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So, Batsman is talking to Schuster, and Schuster says, after Ukraine's victory, but this needs to be addressed today in order for Ukraine to be bright, free, economically strong, and so on and so forth, the issue of migrants will have to be dealt with. Because there won't be enough people and so on. Batsman stayed silent and didn't say anything in response. And he says, so, we'll have to decide who to bring in, what kind of people. And he let it slip that this is what we were deciding in the Syrian refugee camps. You personally recruit people according to he is a citizen of Canada and Italy, if my memory serves me right. Well, as far as I know.
No idea.
How do you personally feel about the idea of filling Ukraine with migrants after the war?
What kind?
Well, let's say not by Europeans. To maintain, to hold on to the demographic since the demographic.
I haven't thought about this question. I'm not interested in this at all. Again, it's this business of dividing up the skin of a bear that hasn't been killed yet. Yes, there will be a shortage of people. I understand that perfectly well. But where those people will come from, I don't know. I'm not the Minister of Migration Policy. I'm a historian. If you have a good question about history, I'm ready to, so to speak, discuss it with you. Let's discuss it.
There's a saying, history is written by the victors. Is that really true?
No, that's just idle speculation. So, if you look at it that way, there was the Great Patriotic War. Russian historians wrote the history of the Great Patriotic War. And what? Germans aren't allowed to write their own history, or what? Well, when you actually start to break down these pretty phrases in practice, then it turns out that behind the pretty phrase, there's no substance. Everyone has the right to write their own history, nothing more than that.
Where do you?
Get your history from?
Well, the history that most people live by.
What majority?
Well, look, okay.
Russian society lives according to the history written by Russian historians. German society lives according to the history written by German historians. So where, exactly, is it that history is written by the victors? So what, if you lose, you don't have the right to write your own history or what?
If Hitler had won, he would have written a different history.
But it is written. What's that got to do with anything?
History.
Is written by Russian historians, by German ones. Well, if Hitler had won, then historians would have written it differently. Hitler would have died, and they'd rewrite it. The whole point of history is that it's constantly being rewritten. You see what I mean?
So basically, history is a constant rewriting.
History? There's no truth in history. Unfortunately, there isn't. It's a humanities discipline, a kind of human knowledge. It's not physics. It's hard to get at the truth here, and even in physics these days, it's very hard to get to the truth, especially in quantum mechanics. There, it's all just theories, mathematical ones, and there's no real truth there. And history, well, it happened, but every generation in every country rewrites history because new sources appear. New sources are discovered, and we interpret these sources in new ways. The situation changes. You see, when the Soviet Union existed, they wrote glory to the CPSU. How wonderful! The communists went into battle. They showed us these communists leading the way, and so on. The Soviet Union collapsed. Are we supposed to describe this history in the same way, writing glory to the CPSU and praising the clever communists? Of course not. We need to rethink things. We understand that. The communists created their own myth of the Great Patriotic War. They wrote it the way the party and the Soviet motherland demanded. But that myth ceased to exist along with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Or is it not like that? Or are we supposed to write glory to the CPSU?
All right, I agree with that. But then it turns out that what is happening today, after some time, could be reinterpreted in a completely different way.
That's absolutely right. Yes. But there are some things that have already become established and are not being reinterpreted, and it's unlikely that they will be reinterpreted differently. Well, for example, the Great Patriotic War. Who attacked whom? The Germans attacked the Soviet Union. No matter how many generations pass, no matter what changes, nothing will change here. The Germans are the aggressor. The Soviet Union is the victim. That's it. There are things that cannot change, and there are things that can be reinterpreted, of course. Just like the modern war. There is the aggressor, the Russian Federation, and there is the victim, Ukraine. We can talk about the reasons, reinterpret things. You can give your reasons, I can give mine. But no one will write, well, maybe North Korea will write, that Ukraine is to blame and Russia has nothing to do with it. But for the whole world, it's clear who the aggressor is and who the victim is. There are things that don't change, and there are things that will be reinterpreted, especially in ancient times. Kievan Rus, somewhere back then, and so on.
So, the question is, can evil turn into good? That's
A philosophical question. It has nothing to do with history. There is no such concept in history of evil or good. In history, there is the concept of cause and effect, some kind of connections. Whether that's good or bad, that's for you to judge. For example, let's say you believe that war is a good thing, and that, for instance, Russia attacking Ukraine is a good thing. That's your personal point of view. No one is really disputing it. It just is what it is. That's it. But someone else might think that war is evil, that war is bloodshed, that war is something impossible to accept. A person shouldn't have anything else inherent to them. That's a philosophical point of view, not a physical one.
that's why I asked about rethinking things. But what if future generations think differently?
Do you think that future generations will believe that war is a good thing? Not.
Sure. To be honest, the book is just sitting there, but I still haven't read it.
You should read it. There's a good quote from Tolstoy. I can't recall it word for word, but the gist is that anyone who thinks war is a good thing is an idiot. How else can you reinterpret war and say that it's a good thing?
You'll say that's a forbidden move. But then, how do you judge the actions of other countries' militaries against other countries? That's just how I see it. Whoever is in power there, when they make those decisions, whatever they are, and they say there's no other way, well, fine, you'll say forbidden move, but still, let's say, the US Iraq.
I'm not ready to discuss the Iraq issue. You're not American. I'm not Iraqi. Where would it even make sense to bring this up?
The conflict with Argentina over the Falkland Islands. Well, that conflict did happen. How should we view things like that when they happen?
Like what? The Falkland Islands were British territory.
The Argentinians don't.
Think so. Whether they do or don't, that's their own personal business. There are internationally recognized borders. At the time the Falklands War began, it was British territory. A military junta came to power in Argentina. They needed to somehow show their strength, to demonstrate it, to unite Argentine society in some way. They decided they needed to seize those islands. Here, Argentina is clearly and unambiguously the aggressor. Britain was defending its territorial integrity. And the Argentinians can think whatever they want. That's their right. They can even write in their textbooks, as long as the junta is in power, that, we were right. But when there's a democratic society there, there will be a rethinking of that war.
Is there a junta in Argentina now?
No, I'm saying if a junta comes to power there again, they might rewrite things.
Well, the idea was that in the 21st century, it's impossible to resolve things this way. Some new politicians say that war is a way to solve political issues. Well, finality, I don't remember how to put it exactly, or how they said it. That is, it's a continuation. So you don't support that point of view?
War is bad. War in Europe is always the beginning of World War III. All world wars started in Europe. And we need to do everything possible to prevent war.
But war is bad. War is bad.
War is bad everywhere. But world wars have never started outside of Europe. And to start a war in Europe, as was done, I won't mention the name of the president. You really have to have nothing in your head at all and not understand that this could be the start of World War III. For what purpose?
Well, I think the war shouldn't have been started, because in any case, and
Especially in Europe.
yes, I wouldn't want it to start anywhere at all, but unfortunately, that's how things happen. You're an interesting conversationalist. I was thinking of remembering something else. But how do you see?
The end of this war?
I honestly don't know anymore, because
But I wish I did.
for me, no matter what, it doesn't go away. It's not conviction, not suspicion, but a feeling that this war is some kind of agreement and that's it, at some very high level, somewhere up there. It just doesn't go away. And
Conspiracy theory, sort of.
I agree, I'll support it.
So, why exactly did he undertake such an action? He was, at that particular moment, still holding on to the fervent hope of forging a comprehensive and lasting deal with Great Britain. For Adolf Hitler, the British people were, and his deeply flawed and prejudiced ideology, considered to be racially acceptable and, therefore, he genuinely believed it was still entirely possible to arrive at a mutually beneficial agreement or understanding with them, despite the ongoing conflicts and ideological differences. And since he was planning to fight in the East sooner or later, he didn't need a war on two fronts. It was an attempt to negotiate with Churchill. Or who was in charge by then? Churchill, I think. And here, well,
Churchill wasn't going to negotiate.
Churchill wasn't going to. But that was the reasoning. That's how it's seen today. So why?
Then didn't the British support the Poles in 1939?
They did support them, but they couldn't conduct large-scale military operations. To support the Poles, you need to have a large land army. Britain didn't have one. To even send part of their ground forces to Poland, they would have needed air superiority. The British didn't have air superiority. There was the Battle of Britain, if you remember, when the Germans. Yes, yes. So it was physically impossible to do that. And the French.
Weren't on the side of the Poles?
The French were also on the side of the Poles, but French society didn't want to fight, and the French government followed the will of French society. No one wanted to fight in the East for some unknown countries. It was exactly the same situation in Munich in 1938, when the Sudetenland was handed over to Hitler. These are all consequences of the First World War. No one wanted to start a war. They thought it was necessary to make concessions to Hitler, as long as someone even worse didn't come to power in Germany. Well, that was a common idle thought at the time. And so they went along with every action and concession in Eastern Europe, which led to Hitler getting a taste for blood, realizing that no one would stand up to him.
If you, brother, as a historian, rewind back, was the First World War Germany's revenge for, maybe I'm misunderstanding, for Franco? Franco.
You're mistaken. Germany won the Franco-Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War. Yeah, I just don't.
Remember who started first? The First World War? The shot in Sarajevo.
Austria declared war on Serbia.
So how did the Germans end up going after the French?
Then the Serbian government turned to Nicholas II, to Russia, for support. and Nicholas II announced mobilization. The Germans opposed the mobilization and declared war on the Russian Empire. As for how the fighting actually started, I don't really remember the details.
And the French, somehow, since they were in the Entente, they said yes.
England, France, Russia, the Entente Bloc.
Basically, all the roots go back to the First World War, no matter how you look at it.
Moreover, nowadays in European history, there's a viewpoint that's really gaining traction that there was actually one big war from 1914 to 1945. That it was one big war, which just had a short break from 1918 to 1939. Because during that period, there were a ton of local conflicts in Europe. Unfortunately, not many people here know about that. We actually have a good book on this topic here in Ukraine. There were a huge number of local conflicts because the borders kept changing after the First World War. Every country thought the borders had been drawn unfairly, and each one tried to grab some territory from its neighbor. But up until 1939, this didn't lead to war.
The, the phone needs to go on the charger. Just a minute.
Let's wrap it up.
Right now. No.
Unfortunately, we'll have to cut the conversation short. Somehow it all falls on me. One moment. If you want to stop, that's fine. The conversation is more or less interesting, at least for me. Since you are, let's say, a more educated person in some things than I am. I'm more.
Educated, and I know more about this topic than you do.
Well, hold on. Education isn't just. So what is education then anyway? That's the question.
Education isn't information, it's making sense of it. It's not enough to read Wikipedia to be educated. You must understand connections between facts.
Well, at the very least, my education allows me to draw some conclusions, maybe superficial ones, but still, about something.
In any science, conclusions are drawn not just from surface level facts, but from deep study and analysis of certain facts.
I agree.
But when someone latches onto one or two facts, just the ones they like, and says, I know these two facts, and from them I draw this conclusion, and just try to change my mind about it.
I have a friend who's a historian, and I once asked him, well, since the birth rate among Europeans is low, kind of declining, does that mean the European nation is dying out? He said, so what? Basically, what's the big deal? A Roman sat in Rome as barbarians rolled in, and he sat there reading Virgil. So what? That's a historical process.
A barbarian would come, study that same Virgil, and become Hellenized or Romanized. There have always been massive migrations in Europe. And to think that a Frenchman is only someone born in France, these days, that's just not the case.
Waves.
Of migration have been actively developing in Europe since the late 19th century. What are you going to do about it? If you close the borders, then Europe's population will die out.
We're coming to the point where the Caucasian race, as such, is dying out, unfortunately.
Why, unfortunately? So, you're a racist then? You feel sorry for Caucasians, but not. And you don't feel sorry for Mongoloids? Personally, I don't really care about any particular race. Caucasian is your racial definition, But for me, racial definitions don't matter. The main thing is that a person becomes a member of this socio-cultural society, whether he's, really, really white. If he considers himself Ukrainian, like my colleague does. I always tell this story. My colleague has a student, a Vietnamese guy, whose parents emigrated from Vietnam. He sells jeans at our local market.
That's common he.
He was born in Ukraine. His name is Lee. He's a typical Vietnamese, and my colleague asks him, Lee, do you consider yourself Vietnamese or Ukrainian? He says, of course I'm Ukrainian. I don't speak Vietnamese very well. We only use it at home. As for the history and culture of Vietnam, I don't really know them at all because I was born in Ukraine, but I know Ukrainian culture and history perfectly well. I'm Ukrainian, and that's wonderful. I don't care what his background is.
There's this saying, a Russian is someone who is Russian at heart. So, by that logic, a Ukrainian is someone who is Ukrainian at heart.
Exactly, because being Russian or Ukrainian is about socioculture. It's about cultural self-perception. Half of the Russian elite were actually Germans. I'm not even talking about the imperial family. Half the army were French, Turks, Moldovans, Serbs, and so on. But they embraced Russianness, and we know all of them as Russian commanders, even though, by origin, the Cantemires were Moldovan, some were Turks, and so on. What difference does it make where someone came from? He adopted this socio-cultural society. He switched to this language. This process is called assimilation. There's no getting away from it. It's a different story if migrants don't integrate into this society. That's where the problem lies. Like, for example, the Turks. A large number of them don't integrate into German society. They live in separate neighborhoods. They consider themselves Turks and don't want to see themselves as anything else. Germans. Yes,
That's really how it is.
and this kind of thing is everywhere in Europe. But what if it's like Zidane, for example, who is originally from Morocco or wherever, an outstanding French footballer who considers himself a true Frenchman, or someone like that? Omar Sy is a wonderful black French actor who considers himself French, not an immigrant, not someone from Nigeria or anywhere else. When they're part of this society, they see themselves as French. So what difference does it make what color his skin is? If he considers himself a follower of Fontaine, Voltaire, Diderot, and so on, and sees himself as French.
I'm not an expert on cultural Marxism, but it seems to me this comes from there.
This isn't cultural Marxism, it's assimilation. And what color his skin is doesn't matter to me at all. If someone comes from deep in Africa, but they're Ukrainian, they speak Ukrainian fluently. That's just wonderful.
What do you think? How ready is Ukrainian society for these kinds of things? I don't think it is.
Ready yet? Not yet, I think, or maybe not at all. We have a good joke about this. I don't know. Do you speak Ukrainian? Or should I translate it into Russian and say it in the original? So, like,
Tell it in Ukrainian.
borders, so who are the Banderites? Do you remember? Yes,
Yes, of course.
people who fought for Ukraine's independence against the Russians, but against the Soviet Union.
Is that right to say? Although Bandera is a rather controversial figure.
So, Bandera gets on a bus that's driving through the western Ukrainian lands, and he needs to find out who's sitting on the bus. Some Russian guy. He gets on, raises his rifle, and says, "Hey, tell me what time it is." And there's a black guy sitting there. And he says, "Uncle, it's 2:30." And Bandera says, sit down, son. I can see you're not a Moscow.
I know this joke.
I think Ukrainian society is quite tolerant. Maybe some part of society isn't ready to accept a different skin color or different eye shape.
From your point of view, why Bandera? I was talking once on chat roulette. There was a young guy sitting there in a mask. It was obvious he was Russian. You could tell by his accent. I asked him about Bandera. He says, well, he thinks Bandera is the traitor of the Ukrainian people. Why? Just because.
He didn't study Bandera's biography well. What should he do?
Hello. I see. We'll have to end the conversation. Unfortunately.
I'll refer you to Scopy about Bandera. He'll recommend you some literature on Bandera, so you can read up on it. There is something about Bandera. There's this book. I started reading it but haven't finished yet. It's a German historian of Polish descent.
Just a second. No, that's Seryoga who turned it on.
Didn't turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah, listen, sorry.
Yes. Historian G. Zigas Rasolinsky Liba. The book is in Russian. It's called Bandera. Fascism, totalitarianism, and so on, but it's enough to just look up the name George Rosalinsky or read this anti-Bandera book, where Bandera is portrayed as a fascist, a scoundrel, and so on. And there's a Russian historian who lives in Berlin, at the University of Berlin, Alexander Gagun. He has a bunch of books on the Bandera movement, and there's also a Ukrainian historian, Volodymyr Vyatrovich, who is a specialist on the Bandera movement. These are people who say that Bandera was a figure in the national liberation movement.
That's not what I wanted to ask, but now it won't work out. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.